Welcome to Security Thursday Leadership and Digital Sovereignty. This is not just about security controls or frameworks. It's about responsibility, clarity, and the decisions that shape how secure an organization really is.
Right. And imagine spending, I don't know, $10 million on this impenetrable, fit-thick steel vault door, you know?
Yeah.
You hire the absolute best engineers in the world to install it. You configure the biometric locks. You calibrate the titanium hinges. You test it meticulously. And then, like a week later, you walk down the hall and watch your employees prop that $10 million vault door wide open with a $5 wooden wedge.
Oh my God.
Right. Every single morning, simply because opening it for every transaction is, quote unquote, too slow.
That is just a perfect visual to start us off today. Because what you just described, this
Oh.
massive investment in technology that gets completely undermined by, well, human behavior, right?
Yep.
That is exactly what modern organizations are doing with their cybersecurity every single day. So if you are a CEO looking at enterprise risk right now, or just a curious team member wondering why your company's digital protocols feel completely disconnected from reality, this deep dive applies directly to you.
It really does.
Today, we are setting out to completely reframe how we think about safety in the digital space. We're going to explore the insights from Stephen A. Davis. Specifically, his article was Sin Security Controls, or What are Security Controls?
Yeah, and we are going to look at an incredibly uncomfortable reality for a lot of organizations here. The core problem we really need to confront today is that organizations, well, they systematically misunderstand security at a foundational level.
Right.
They treat it as a product, they treat it as a line item on a quarterly budget that you can just go out and buy. You purchase the firewall, you subscribe to the antivirus, you check the compliance box, and then you just assume the perimeter is secure.
The assumption is that you can essentially purchase your way out of responsibility.
Yes. Exactly, yeah.
But security isn't a product. It's a leadership culture that you have to painstakingly build. But the blinking dashboards and those shiny vendor brochures, they create this illusion. So we need to look past the acronyms and really examine the human architecture that is actually running the show.
Right, and to do that, we have to completely dismantle a very dangerous assumption right out of the gate. We have to break apart the idea that a piece of software, no matter how expensive or advanced it is the same thing as a security control.
Yeah.
If we don't separate those two concepts right now, we'll fall right back into the trap of treating IT like a vending machine for safety.
Right. So let's draw that hard line then.
Yeah.
We need to distinguish between a tool and a control. Based on Davis's work, a tool is, well, it's the tangible asset, right?
Right.
It's the software. It's the hardware. It's the millions of lines of code, the machine learning algorithm that's, analyzing traffic, or even just the physical server rack sitting in a data center. It is an object with potential.
Exactly. And a control, by stark contrast, is the systemic integration of that tool into human behavior.
Okay, integration.
Yeah, it is the organizational policy surrounding the tool, the daily operational reality of the people interacting with it, and crucially, the leadership clarity that dictates how it is used when operations go completely sideways. A tool without a control is, honestly, it's just a very expensive paperweight.
Wow. And Davis actually brings up a specific, really chilling scenario in the source material to illustrate the consequences of confusing the two, doesn't he?
He does, and it's a scenario that plays out in corporate environments far more often than anyone wants to admit, frankly. He observed a company that had gone all in on purchasing sophisticated security tools.
Like they bought the whole catalog.
Oh, completely. They had
Yeah.
the advanced threat detection systems, the fully encrypted databases, the multi-factor authentication systems. Like, they had everything you would see on a modern auditor's checklist,
Right.
but they completely failed to implement actual security controls.
Meaning, they had the software deployed, but no human process is actually anchored to it, right? The tools are just functioning in a vacuum.
Yeah, the software was doing exactly what it was programmed to do. The alerts were firing. The access logs were generating massive amounts of data. The problem was that nobody knew whose job it was to respond to an alert at, 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday.
Aches.
Right. Nobody was explicitly tasked with auditing the access logs to look for anomalies. And the result was a near catastrophic data incident. The business was almost entirely destroyed. Their trust in the market just evaporated overnight.
So the tools functioned flawlessly, but because the controls didn't exist, the company almost went under anyway. That's wild. I mean, the natural question that follows is about the underlying psychology there. Like, why do highly intelligent executives authorize millions of dollars for tools and then completely ignore the controls?
It's baffling, right?
It is. It seems like buying an airplane and then just forgetting to hire a pilot.
Well, it comes down to a psychological phenomenon we can call diffused responsibility. We see this in social psychology all the time, right? Like the bystander effect.
Right, right. Where everyone thinks someone else will do it.
Exactly. If someone needs help in a crowded street, everyone assumes someone else will call the paramedics, so nobody actually does. Now, apply that to corporate IT. When an organization spends $10 million on a unified threat management system and an AI-driven behavioral firewall, the executives, the middle managers, and even the everyday employees, they all subconsciously shift their mindset.
They think the machine has it handled.
They do. They start to believe that the software itself is the paramedic. They assume the technology is doing all the heavy lifting.
That connects directly to the core theme of our previous deep dive. For those of you following our ongoing discussions, back in episode Memory STL-DSGE001EN 2026-0506, we explored this exact phenomenon under the label of the security paradox.
Right, the paradox.
Yeah, that bizarre, completely counterintuitive reality, where more technological investment frequently leads to less human vigilance.
The paradox is very real. Think about a standard email spam filter. If the filter is, say, 99% effective at catching malicious emails, the employee using that inbox loses the daily mental muscle required to scrutinize links.
Because they just trust the filter.
Exactly. They stop looking for anomalies because the machine has conditioned them to feel safe. So when that 1% of really sophisticated phishing emails inevitably slips through, the employee's guard is completely down. They think, well, if it made it to my inbox, the $1 million AI must have cleared it. The tool inadvertently subsidizes human apathy.
Okay, wait, I don't buy that. I really need to push back here.
Go for it.
I mean, if a company goes out and spends millions on a next-generation behavioral firewall that analyzes network traffic patterns and automatically blocks unauthorized access, aren't those the controls? It's like in the cybersecurity industry, on every audit spreadsheet you will ever see, those systems are literally categorized as technical controls.
Sure.
Are you honestly saying that buying, configuring, and deploying the tool isn't enough to call it a control?
I hear where you're coming from. I really do. It's the standard industry terminology. It is absolutely how the vendors package and sell these products to procurement departments. But while we have to look at the operational reality of how these systems actually fail in the real world, let's return to that vault door analogy we opened with.
Okay, the $10 million steel door.
Yes. The vault door is the tool. It is an absolute masterpiece of engineering. Now, if the bank manager decides that the biometric scanner takes too long to use every single time they need to get cash for a teller, and they decide to take that wooden wedge and prop the foot-thick steel door wide open at 9 o'clock every morning to keep the customer line moving.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right. Does the bank have a security control?
Well, obviously not. The physical barrier is completely neutralized.
Exactly. The tool is physically present in the building. The engineering is flawless. It didn't break. But the human behavior around it, the policy, the prioritization of convenience, the lack of operational discipline, has completely negated its existence as a security measure. If the human behavior is flawed, the control simply does not exist. You just have a very expensive piece of metal sitting in a hallway.
Wow. So the control is effectively weaponized against the defender, in a way. The illusion of safety makes the environment more dangerous than if the door hadn't been there at all, because at least without the door, people would act like they were exposed.
Precisely. You hit the nail on the head. The tool is just potential, right? The control is the actualized reality of how we behave around it.
Okay. So if tools aren't controls, we really need to map out what an actual control architecture looks like in practice. We need to move beyond the theory and look at how a business actually builds this. And Davis breaks this down into a framework of 4 distinct interlocking pillars, right? Organizational, technological, physical, and personnel.
Yeah, and the critical thesis behind this framework is interdependency. If any one of these pillars is weak or neglected, the entire structural integrity of the organization's defense is compromised. You cannot spend heavily on 3 and ignore the 4th.
Makes sense. Let's tackle pillar 1 then. Organizational controls. This is essentially the bedrock of the entire system. We are talking about the clarity versus bureaucracy debate.
Right. Organizational controls are the documented processes. They are the risk matrices that define what is acceptable. They are the explicitly defined roles and responsibilities. But organizations frequently, almost systematically mess this up by confusing a control with a bureaucracy.
Oh, definitely.
They assume that having a 200-page, legally dense PDF stored on a corporate intranet site means they have organizational control.
Which nobody reads, by the way. Let's extrapolate why that specifically fails. Because the difference between clarity and bureaucracy is literally life and death in an incident.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine a junior SOC analyst. And for clarity, this is the person sitting in the Security Operations Center actually watching the network traffic monitors.
Yep, the front line.
Right. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning on a major holiday weekend. Everyone else is offline. Suddenly, this junior analyst spots a massive, highly anomalous data transfer. They are watching gigabytes of sensitive customer data being funneled out of the network to an unrecognized external IP address in a foreign jurisdiction. It is an active, catastrophic breach in progress.
Basically the ultimate nightmare scenario for any IT department.
Exactly. Now, the junior analyst sees the exfiltration happening in real time. But the organization's so-called control, that 200-page manual, mandates that in order to sever an active external server connection, the analyst requires a direct documented sign-off from the director of IT infrastructure.
Oh no, so the hierarchy becomes a bottleneck.
A fatal bottleneck. The director is asleep or perhaps on a transatlantic flight. The junior analyst tries calling their cell phone. It goes straight to voicemail. The analyst tries the backup contact. Nothing. So the analyst just sits there watching the data pour out of the network. They hesitate. They know exactly how to type the command to kill the connection, but they don't have the delegated organizational authority to do it. They are terrified of getting fired for shutting down a critical system by mistake. In that specific scenario, the organizational control hasn't just failed, it has actively aided the attacker. Delay equals risk.
That is the tragedy of a poorly designed organizational structure. I mean, true organizational control isn't about creating red tape to protect management from liability. It is about absolute granular clarity on who has the authority to make the decision when things go wrong.
Right.
If that junior analyst had a clear, pre-authorized, heavily communicated mandate to sever the connection and ask questions later, well, that is a functional organizational control. It empowers action rather than paralyzing it.
Okay, so assuming the organization has its internal hierarchy and decision-making authority sorted out, how do they handle the actual systems running in the background? We just spent considerable time separating tools from control, so how does technology factor into Pillar 2?
Technology is essential, obviously, but it is incredibly dangerous if it isn't viewed as a living, breathing part of the business ecosystem. Davis highlights the profound danger of what we call drift.
Drift.
Yeah. Technological controls must be regularly updated, audited, and maintained as part of a holistic concept. The mindset of set it and forget it is one of the most destructive forces in digital security.
Let's use an analogy to clarify how drift happens. It's like relying on a highly detailed, incredibly accurate physical map from the year 2015 to navigate a major expanding city today.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. The map didn't suddenly break. The ink didn't fade. But over the last decade, the city built 3 new highways, completely rerouted the downtown one-way streets, and demolished an entire neighborhood to build a stadium. If your tool, your map, doesn't update to match the new terrain of reality, you're going to drive right into a concrete wall.
Because the environment evolved while the tool remains static.
Exactly. Let's apply that to a specific enterprise scenario. Imagine you are the IT director of a rapidly growing e-commerce company. You purchase a highly sophisticated cloud security posture management tool, a CSPM. This is a system designed to monitor all your cloud servers and ensure they comply with security rules.
Okay.
You spend 3 grueling months configuring it. It establishes the baseline. It mapped your entire cloud architecture perfectly. You pat yourself on the back, declare the system secure, and walk away to fight the next operational fire.
Which is a very standard operational rhythm, right? IT teams are always under-resourced and rushing to the next project.
Exactly. So fast forward 2 years. Over those 24 months, the business is scaled aggressively. The marketing department integrated 5 new third-party analytics APIs. The engineering team migrated 3 massive legacy customer databases to a completely new cloud region to reduce latency. The business evolved at breakneck speed, but the technological control did not. It drifted.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so now, 2 years later, that expensive CSPM tool is staring at an environment it no longer recognizes. It starts generating 10,000 false positive alerts every single day, screaming that there are violations everywhere because it doesn't understand the new normal of the business.
And we have to look at the human cost of that technological failure. What happens to the SOC analysts who are receiving 10,000 false alarms a day?
They experience severe physiological and psychological alert fatigue. It's exactly like living in a building where the fire alarm goes off every 20 minutes for a year.
You just tune it out.
Eventually, yeah, you stop looking for smoke. You just put on noise-canceling headphones. In the corporate setting, the analysts mute the Slack channel. They write a blanket exception rule in the code to just quiet the noise of the system. The technological control has completely degraded, not because the software experienced a bug, but because the tool wasn't maintained alongside the evolution of the business.
Right. The technological pillar must be actively and continuously tended to by the organizational pillar. They are completely inseparable. A tool is only as good as the organizational commitment to maintaining its relevance. Which brings us to the third pillar. And this is arguably the most overlooked and misunderstood aspect of modern cybersecurity: physical controls.
It is entirely forgotten. I mean, in the modern era of cloud computing, zero-trust network architectures, and global remote workforces, we act like the physical world doesn't exist anymore. We talk about data lakes and serverless functions, and we start to believe that everything is just abstract data floating ethereally in the cloud.
But physical controls, securing actual geographic locations, physical doors, hardware server rooms, and the physical access to the endpoints, they are just as critical as ever. In fact, they are significantly more vulnerable now because the traditional corporate perimeter has completely dissolved.
Yeah.
We no longer have everyone sitting behind a badge access door in a heavily monitored office building.
No, we really don't. Let's paint a picture of how that perimeter dissolution creates catastrophic, invisible risk. Think about a lead developer for a major fintech startup. This person is brilliant. They hold the architectural keys to the kingdom. But because the company embraces a modern, flexible work culture, this developer decides to work from a busy, trendy downtown coffee shop on a Tuesday morning.
Right.
They have their company laptop open. They are logged directly into the core production environment, making live changes to code.
An incredibly common scenario. The perimeter is now a wobbly table next to an espresso machine.
Exactly. So the barista calls out their name for their latte. The developer stands up, walks 20 feet to the pickup counter, grabs the coffee, and walks back. The entire process takes maybe 40 seconds. But they didn't lock their laptop screen.
Oh.
They didn't think they needed to because they were just stepping away for a moment. In that 40-second window of physical exposure, someone sitting at the very next table, maybe it's a corporate spy, maybe it's an organized penetration tester, or maybe it's just an opportunistic threat actor who recognizes what they're looking at. They lean over, they take out their smartphone, and snap a high-resolution photo of the developer's screen. And visible on that screen, in plain text, are hard-coded API keys.
And we should define that for clarity. An API key is essentially a digital master password that allows different software programs to talk to each other. If an attacker has that key, they don't need to hack through the front door or the firewall. They can just walk right in the back door as if they are an authorized program.
Exactly. The attacker now has the credentials to access the company's deepest databases. Millions of dollars spent on quantum encryption, military-grade multi-factor authentication, and endpoint behavioral analysis, all bypassed in 3 seconds in the physical world by a camera phone.
That is the essence of physical control failure. It's not just about installing badge readers at corporate headquarters anymore. It's about the physical security of the endpoint, wherever it happens to be in the world.
Okay. That sounds good in theory, but what happens in reality? I have to interrupt this because we are describing a level of operational strictness that feels completely detached from the modern business environment.
How so?
Well, if I'm an executive at a fast-scaling startup, and you're telling me I need granular organizational clarity on every decision, perfectly maintained technological hygiene without any drift, and strict physical protocols for remote workers, spending weeks writing policy manuals and enforcing all this feels like massive corporate red tape. It kills innovation. Startups live or die on speed and agility. Isn't this entirely rigorous structure just slowing the business down to the point of uncompetitiveness?
Well, that is the classic eternal friction point between security and business operations. The complaint is always, security slows us down. Security is the department of no. But I will counter that argument by saying that True organizational control, the actual integration of these pillars we were discussing, isn't about building a wall of red tape that halts production. It is about absolute clarity. It is about what we call front-loading the friction.
Front-loading the friction. Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that.
It means you intentionally choose to have the difficult, slightly slower, heavily structured conversations now during peacetime. You have them when the stakes are low so that you don't have to have them during a crisis when the stakes are existential.
Ah, I see.
If you clearly define the incident response rules today, if you automate the access revocation protocols today, if you train that lead developer to intuitively, subconsciously hit Windows key plus L to lock their screen every single time they stand up, you are embedding security into the actual muscle memory of the business.
You take the cognitive load off the emergency.
Yes. You front-load the friction of building the habit so that when a crisis hits, speed is actually possible. You don't have to convene a committee to decide who has the authority to shut down a server. You already know. If you don't have these controls deeply embedded, a security incident won't just slow you down. The resulting chaos and indecision will paralyze your business for weeks.
Wow. Okay, so you invest time up front to buy speed when survival depends on it. And that concept of organizational muscle memory brings us seamlessly into the final, and undoubtedly the most complex pillar of Davis's blueprint, Pillar 4, personnel controls and psychological safety.
The human element. Davis makes the point that true security requires continuous education, awareness, and sensitization of the workforce. This is about moving aggressively beyond what the industry refers to as compliance theater.
Let's dissect compliance theater, because we need to be brutally honest about how personnel controls are currently handled in 90% of global organizations.
Please do.
It's usually the end of the fiscal quarter. The HR department sends out an automated threatening email saying your mandatory cybersecurity training is past due. You sigh, you log into a corporate portal, and you are faced with a mind-numbingly boring 45-minute animated video from 2018.
We've all been there.
The voiceover is just this monotone drone. And the kicker,
Yeah.
you literally cannot click the next button until a countdown timer runs out on each individual slide.
It is an exercise in endurance, not education. And what are the employees actually doing while that video plays?
They mute the tab entirely, they drag the browser window to their secondary monitor, and they spend those 45 minutes answering actual work emails, drafting reports, or writing code. They aren't absorbing a single piece of information.
Right.
Then at the end of the module, they guess their way through a painfully obvious 5-question multiple-choice quiz. The question would be something like, should you write your password on a sticky note and leave it on your monitor? A, yes. B, no.
Such a joke.
They click. No. They are awarded a generic PDF certificate of completion, and the company executives look at a dashboard spreadsheet and declare, look, 100% completion rate. We have excellent personnel controls. It is complete and utter theater. It does absolutely nothing to alter human behavior under stress.
Because it doesn't change behavior, because it only tests basic, superficial knowledge.
Yes.
And what the expert sources translate from Davis's core thesis here is profound. Security is not just about what you know. Quizzes test what you know. Security is about how you behave when nobody is watching.
That's a great distinction.
And how you react when you realize you've made a terrible mistake. And that reaction relies entirely on the culture of psychological safety. In fact, psychological safety is not an HR buzzword. It is a hard security control.
Classifying psychological safety as a hard security control is it's a radical shift in perspective. We normally categorize firewalls, encryption, and endpoint detection as hard controls. Psychological safety sounds soft. It sounds abstract. But if we analyze the mechanics of how a breach actually unfolds, it becomes obvious. Silence is an organization's absolute greatest vulnerability.
Walk us through the anatomy of that silence. How does it manifest in a technical environment?
Okay, let's look at the reality of operational stress. Imagine a tired, mid-level software engineer. It's a busy Tuesday afternoon. They're heavily caffeinated, rushing to meet an aggressive sprint deadline set by a demanding product manager, and they make a simple, completely human mistake.
Okay.
While pushing a new feature update to a public GitHub repository, which is a platform where developers store and share code, they accidentally include a hard-coded root credential, a master password for their company's entire cloud infrastructure. Now, 5 minutes after the code goes live, they realize what they've done. Their heart drops into their stomach, the adrenaline spikes.
A critical error, but driven by the pressure of the environment, not malice.
Exactly. Now, what happens in the next 60 seconds is entirely dependent on the culture the leadership team has built. If that engineer works in a fear-based culture, a place where the CTO screams at people for missing deadlines, where errors are punished with public humiliation on Slack, or where people are routinely fired to make examples of them, what does that terrified engineer do?
They panic. Their primary goal is no longer protecting the company. Their primary goal is protecting their livelihood. They try to secretly delete the commit. They try to rewrite the code history to erase the evidence, and they just sit at their desk, sweating, praying to God that nobody noticed the brief window where the key was exposed. They actively choose silence.
The cover-up begins. But on the public internet, silence doesn't buy you safety. There are automated bots run by sophisticated ransomware cartels that constantly scrape public GitHub repositories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, looking for exactly this kind of mistake. That bot likely grabbed the exposed root credential within 4 seconds of it being posted. The attackers now possess the keys to the kingdom. But the company's internal security team has absolutely no idea, because the one human being who knew the perimeter was breached was too terrified of their own boss to speak up. The vulnerability sits hidden for 3 months until the ransomware cartel decides to exploit it, encrypts the entire corporate network, and demands a $5 million payout in cryptocurrency.
That is the ultimate consequence of a toxic culture. If the employee is more terrified of their own leadership than they are of Russian hackers, your perimeter is already breached. The fear creates the blind spot.
But wait, that assumes people behave rationally, and that forgiveness breeds responsibility, which they don't, and it often doesn't. Isn't that just idealism? I have to challenge this view of human behavior. You're essentially telling me that if an employee makes a catastrophic mistake, leaves the digital vault door wide open, and jeopardizes the entire company, management should just hug them, offer them a cup of tea, and thank them. If there are no severe consequences for catastrophic failure, aren't we just incentivizing sloppiness, gross negligence, and a complete lack of operational rigor?
I understand why the concept of psychological safety sounds like a lack of accountability when framed that way. It is a very common misconception. But you are conflating two entirely different concepts here. Psychological safety is not an exemption from accountability. The goal of this personnel control isn't to eliminate consequences. The goal is absolute, immediate visibility.
Visibility over punishment.
Yes. The rule of leadership and security is this. You punish the cover-up, not the mistake. If that engineer immediately walks into their manager's office, pale, shaking, and says, I messed up, I just leaked a root credential to the public internet, we need to roll our keys and shut down access right now, the manager should not fire them. Really, the manager should look at them and say, thank you for bringing this to me immediately, let's lock it down together. By doing that, the manager ensures that the next time someone on the team makes a mistake, they will report it immediately too. If you punish the honesty, you guarantee future cover-ups. The behavior you reward is the behavior you get.
Okay, the distinction is crucial. You aren't rewarding the error, you are rewarding the speed of the disclosure. So, synthesizing this, a robust security culture isn't tested when things are calm or when everyone is taking their time during a scheduled audit. It is tested in that specific, agonizing moment of panic. It is tested when massive pressure is applied, which transitions us perfectly into exploring how this looks at the very top of the organizational chart. Section 4. Leadership decisions under operational pressure.
We call this the crucible. This is where we elevate everything we've discussed so far, from the IT department, from the SOC analysts, from the developers, all the way up to the C-suite. Davis's core premise here is vital to understand. Security is not a static state of control. It is a maturity level.
A maturity level.
Yes. And a maturity level only truly reveals itself under extreme pressure, severe time constraints, and agonizing goal conflicts.
The crucible of goal conflicts. Let's dig into the concept of the normalization of exceptions, because this is exactly where the theoretical controls we discussed in Pillar 1 meet the brutal, uncompromising reality of capitalism. When commercial urgency collides head-on with a security protocol, what does leadership actually do?
Theory breaks down fast here. We need to stress test this with a concrete, real-world scenario to see how organizations actually behave.
Okay, here is the ultimate Friday afternoon stress test for a leadership team. It is 4:00 p.m. on a Friday. The company has a massive, highly anticipated marketing campaign, a total brand relaunch scheduled to go live in exactly 1 hour at 5:00 p.m.
Classic timing.
The CEO has personally promised the board of directors that this launch will happen today. They have assured investors it will drive a 20% bump in quarterly revenue. $2 million of digital ad spend across multiple platforms is queued up, automated, and ready to fire in 60 minutes.
The stakes are incredibly high. The adrenaline in the executive suite is pumping. Careers are literally on the line.
At 4:15 p.m., the phone rings in the IT department. It's a third-party marketing vendor managing the campaign. They are in an absolute panic. They tell the IT director, "We have a critical tracking bug in the live environment code. If we don't fix it right now, the analytics won't track the campaign data, the conversion metrics will be lost, and your $2 million in ad spend will be completely wasted. We will be flying blind over the launch weekend."
A massive, time-sensitive operational crisis.
The vendor continues. They say, "Our normal restricted access portal is too slow to push this fix through your staging environment. We need unrestricted administrative root access directly to your live production database right now, just for the weekend, so our engineers can go in and manually fix the code."
Red flags everywhere.
Right. Now, the organization has a strict security policy, the organizational control we talked about earlier. That documented policy clearly states that granting any third-party root access to production requires a 48-hour security review and a mandatory sandbox test. But they don't have 48 hours, they have 45 minutes.
This is the crucible. This is where the maturity level is exposed.
The IT director runs into the CEO's office. The CEO is staring at the clock ticking down on the wall. If the CEO overrides the security policy, if they look at the IT director and say, "I don't care about the 48-hour review, give the vendor the access, we absolutely cannot lose this $2 million launch," what happens to the security culture of that company?
The culture collapses in that exact second. It just evaporates. The CEO has just sent a broadcast message to the entire company that supersedes every training video and policy manual ever created. The message is, our security policies are just suggestions. And when push comes to shove, revenue always trumps safety. They have normalized an exception. And human psychology dictates that if you normalize an exception once, it becomes the new invisible rule. The next time a project manager is behind schedule, they will remember that Friday afternoon. They will think, well, the CEO bypassed security for the marketing launch, so I can bypass it for my project too.
And the tragic irony is the aftermath. Let's play out the scenario where they grant the access.
Yeah.
The launch happens, the CEO sighs with relief, everyone cheers. But because they bypassed the 48-hour review, they completely missed the fact that the third-party vendors network had already been compromised by a threat actor a week prior.
Happens all the time.
When the vendor logs into the production database with their newly granted root access, the hacker rides right in behind them, completely undetected. 3 days later, the company suffers a multi-million-dollar data breach, losing tens of millions in market cap and facing regulatory fines.
The CEO traded a highly visible, immediate $2 million marketing risk for an invisible $50 million enterprise existential crisis. The control didn't fail, the technology didn't fail, the leadership failed under pressure.
This brings us to a fascinating, highly relevant modern twist on this exact leadership test. Digital sovereignty in the age of AI. We were talking about human leaders making agonizing, pressured decisions. But what happens when we start delegating that thinking to machines?
This introduces the concept of cognitive convenience, which is perhaps the most insidious threat to modern leadership. We are entering an era where AI can analyze network logs, suggest dynamic firewall rules, and even draft our risk assessment policies. The temptation for a stressed, overworked CEO facing that Friday afternoon crisis is to look at an AI-generated risk dashboard that says vendor access profile is green and just blindly click approve.
The temptation is overwhelming. You're exhausted from a 60-hour week. The AI sounds incredibly confident. It presents the data beautifully, and agreeing with it takes zero cognitive energy. It relieves you of the burden of the decision.
But that abdication of thought is the death of digital sovereignty. When we talk about digital sovereignty, most people assume we mean hosting your data on local servers instead of foreign clouds. It is much deeper than that. True digital sovereignty means maintaining your cognitive authority over your own business.
Cognitive authority.
It is about retaining the ability to understand why a decision is being made. You can delegate a computational task to an artificial intelligence. You can have it scan 1 million lines of code in 3 seconds, which a human could never do. But you absolutely cannot delegate systemic responsibility.
Because the liability remains human. When the regulatory bodies come knocking, or when the government finds you for a massive data breach, or when you are sitting in front of a congressional hearing trying to explain why millions of your customers' social security numbers are now on the dark web, you cannot put an algorithm on the witness stand.
Precisely. You cannot look at a judge or your board of directors and say, well, the AI dashboard told me the vendor was safe. The liability, the moral weight, and the systemic responsibility rest entirely and unmovably on human shoulders. Leadership requires retaining that human judgment, asking the difficult questions, and understanding the mechanisms of risk, even when the machine offers a highly convenient, frictionless shortcut.
That breaks down under pressure, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think you're ignoring something critically important about the reality of corporate governance here.
How so?
You're describing a version of leadership that operates without immediate personal consequences. It is incredibly easy for us to sit here analyzing theoretical frameworks and say, hold the line, don't give the vendor access, question the AI's logic, but put yourself in the shoes of that CEO. If they stop the launch, they lose $2 million instantly. That is a guaranteed, measurable loss. They will have to face a furious board of directors on Monday morning to explain why they missed the quarterly targets over a theoretical security risk. They might actually get fired for that decision. It's easy to preach maturity and digital sovereignty, but that idealistic view shatters under the brutal pressure of quarterly earnings reports.
You are absolutely right to point out the brutality of that reality. Let's let that tension sit for a moment, because it is agonizing. The choice is never between a clear good and a clear bad. It is a choice between two distinct types of pain.
Right.
If the CEO halts the launch, there is real, immediate, quantifiable financial pain. There is intense professional risk to their own career. But that is exactly what makes it a leadership test. It wouldn't be a crucible if the right choice were easy, cost-free, and universally applauded.
So the cost of leadership is absorbing the pain that others cannot.
Yes. The fundamental failure of the modern corporate mindset is assuming that security is just the IT department's problem. Management assumes it is an issue to be solved silently in the background by technicians without ever impacting the trajectory of the business. It's not. Security is a profound, systemic business risk that the CEO must actively manage, personally own, and occasionally suffer for.
Wow.
If a CEO is not willing to absorb the short-term financial hit of delaying a compromised launch in order to protect the long-term integrity of the company's data and customer trust, they are not actually leading the company. They are just gambling with it.
They're just gambling with it. That is a heavy, necessary truth to swallow. The CEO isn't a leader. They are a gambler relying on luck. Which brings us to the synthesis of everything we've unpacked in this deep dive.
Right.
Let's map out the journey we've taken through these sources.
It has been a comprehensive dismantling of some very old, very stubborn paradigms.
We started by entirely dismantling the illusion of purchase security. We established that a tool, a piece of software, a hardware firewall, an AI monitor, is not a security control until it is systemically integrated into human behavior and operational policy. The $10 million vault door is useless if the culture props it open with a wooden wedge. You cannot buy your way out of organizational responsibility.
From there, we rebuilt a proper understanding of digital defense using Davis's 4 pillars. We saw that organizational clarity prevents the chaotic, paralyzing delays that aid attackers. Technological maintenance prevents the silent, invisible degradation and drift of our tools.
Yeah, that drift is so dangerous.
Physical reality reminds us that the corporate perimeter dissolves the exact moment an employee opens a laptop in a public coffee shop. And personnel controls are nothing more than useless compliance theater unless they are deeply rooted in genuine psychological safety.
We analyzed how a fear-based culture breeds silence, and how silence breeds catastrophic hidden vulnerabilities. And finally, we placed all of those theoretical concepts into the crucible of leadership. We proved that these controls are only as strong as the executive culture that upholds them when the clock is ticking, the ad money is on the line, and the temptation to take a cognitive or procedural shortcut is at its absolute peak.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to build on this entire discussion. A philosophical concept for our listeners to take back to their next board meeting, their next architectural review, or their next Friday afternoon crisis.
Give us the parting thought.
Think deeply about the concept of the silence of good security. In almost every other area of business, a successful investment produces a highly visible, tangible return. You spend millions on a marketing campaign, you get a spike in sales, you invest heavily in R&D, you get a brilliant new product feature. But perfect, flawless, incredibly expensive security produces absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
It produces no headlines, no data breaches, no dramatic late-night war rooms, and no opportunities for executives to make heroic saves.
Just produces a quiet, profoundly boring Tuesday.
Exactly. So the provocative question you must ask yourself is this. How does your organization measure, value, and reward the absence of disaster? Because human nature craves recognition. If your culture only promotes and praises the firefighters who loudly put out the blaze, you will inevitably subconsciously incentivize people to quietly start fires or ignore the smoke just so they can swoop in and be the hero. To build true security, you must learn to measure and reward the silence.
Reward the silence. What an incredible paradigm shift. Security is not a control problem. It's a leadership decision.